So, in real life, before the dream started, my wife and I had been up for a while, and we were both trying to sleep, and we were up way past usual, and we were both tossing and turning. And at some point, I actually fell asleep, but it was only for probably 20 minutes or something like that. And when I fell asleep, I had a dream. And in the dream, it was like the same thing. It was like the dream started exactly where things left off in real life. So in the dream, I had got up from bed and come downstairs because my wife had come downstairs because she couldn't sleep. So I just wanted to come down and see her and talk to her because neither one of us were sleeping. But in the dream, when I came downstairs, she was hanging out, and after a few minutes, one of our kids came downstairs, and they couldn't sleep either. And then after a couple of minutes, our other kid came downstairs, and so I brought them both back upstairs and tried to get them settled in so they could sleep. I came back downstairs again, and after only a few minutes, our older child came back downstairs again because they were still having trouble sleeping. So I brought our kids upstairs and got them together, told them that they could sleep in our bed just to try to get them to settle down and to sleep. And I got them all covered up, and I came back downstairs, and I was talking to my wife in the dream, and we were hanging out, and I said it was getting really late and I wanted to fall asleep, and I was getting tired, so I said I was going to let the dog out and then be right back upstairs. So she went upstairs and was taking care of the kids, getting them in their beds and stuff, and I went outside and let the dog out. When I let the dog out, I was walking around in the yard, and it was late at night. It was past midnight in the dream. Just like in real life, it was past midnight when we were trying to sleep. We usually go to bed pretty early. By like 9 o'clock, we're usually sleeping. So in the dream, I'm walking around in the backyard, and it's dark outside, and just letting the dog have a few minutes before we go to bed. And out of the corner of my eye, I noticed this tree, and the tree was like lit up for a second. It lit up like it was almost like it had like whitish, yellowish Christmas lights on it, but it just kind of flashed for just a second. And it caught my attention in the dream, and I started looking at the tree, trying to figure out if a car had driven by or if somebody had lights on this tree and they just turned them on for just a second or what. So I'm staring at this tree, and then all of a sudden my dog notices a fox, and the fox runs into the field across from our house, and my dog takes off after the fox and chases it into this cornfield. And I went to go get my dog, and I was calling her name, and then another fox popped out of nowhere and started running up the road, And my dog came back out of the cornfield and started chasing this other fox. And then I don't know if the fox went into my neighbor's house, but all of a sudden my dog ran into my neighbor's house. It was like my neighbor had heard me calling my dog's name in the middle of the night, and he opened his door, and my dog ran inside of their house. And I went inside the house and got my dog, and the neighbor had 2 little girls and his wife in the house. And I went in and got my dog and apologized and came back out. And I had my dog in my arms because she was like scared, which is kind of unusual for my dog in real life. But I picked up my dog and was walking out of my neighbor's house. And my neighbor was standing there in the doorway to let me out of the house, and all of a sudden we saw like this. He looked like a HOA security guard type of guy. And he was running down the road really fast. And he had on like a neon green reflective security vest. And he was running down the road, and me and my neighbor were like, what is that? What's going on? And he told us, he stopped and he came up to us and said, get your windows and your doors boarded up, or put metal or wood or anything you can against your windows and your doors. And my neighbor and I looked at each other like, was this guy crazy? What's going on? And then he kind of gets up on our face and gets more serious and says that there was people in town that were upset and they were protesting about some decision that Trump just made, some kind of law or something that he just signed into effect. And there was like really radical left protesters in town, and things got out of control, and that these people were just causing destruction and chaos really bad, and that was coming our way. And then the guy ran back into the road and started running down the road again. My neighbor and I just kind of looked at each other, and then another security guard came in like a little side-by-side cart, and he was driving down the road in the same direction really fast, and he yelled at us to do the same thing. He said, get your houses boarded up and do it fast, turn all the lights off, because there was this big protest in town and things had taken a violent turn. And then he went speeding off. So I told my neighbor I was going to go home and get all the lights turned off and get my house locked up and try to do what I could. And he said he was going to do the same thing. Right before I left, my neighbor asked me if I wanted to come back later and have a beer. And I said, no thanks, I don't drink. In real life, I don't drink, and I had no interest in drinking in the dream, but I had the feeling that this neighbor was just asking me that because things were getting crazy in town, and that was like his way of dealing with it, and he wanted to kind of take the edge off, and that was how he was going to prepare for it or something. So I considered it a nice enough gesture, but I just didn't want to do it. So I told him I was just going to go home, but I said I'll come back later if something really happens. I'll come back later and check on you guys. And he said, okay. So I went home and I went into my house and I told my wife what had just happened. And I was gonna go out in the yard and try to find any scrap metal or wood or anything. Try to board up the house or the windows as best I could. So my wife went back upstairs with our boys and made sure that they were all together in one bedroom. And I put my dog inside. Told them all just to stay together. I went back outside. I was gonna get some wood or some metal and just whatever I could find. And I noticed a car drive by, and it drove by our house, and there was no street lights on, and everything had already gotten dark. All the neighbors had turned off their lights, and my entryway light was on because I was just gonna check for some wood and come right back in. And I went out into the yard, and I saw a car drive by with no lights on, and it kind of made me nervous because it was weird for somebody to drive by the house at night with no lights on their car, and they drove by slow. And they went down to the end of the road to this cul-de-sac thing and turned around, drove by my house again, and they went up over this hill and out of like the little housing development road that we lived on in the dream. And I just kind of shook my head and was thinking things are getting strange. That was weird and I didn't like it. And I started to make my way around the back of the house. And then another car drove by and it was doing the same thing. Just driving around with no lights on. But this time, the car stopped in front of my house. And somebody yelled out the window of the car, asked me what I was doing. And I said, I'm going to get some wood and try to board up my windows because I heard that there was a protest and things got out of control. And the guy told me to do it fast. He said he was just driving around and that people are already starting to come into our neighborhood. He said get stuff locked up as fast as possible and just go inside. And then as I was going back toward the house, he said that his house number was the number 23. And he said that he didn't even mean to buy the house number 23. And in the dream I knew that that number meant something to the people that were doing the protests, that were getting violent, or it's like they're looting people's houses and just smashing stuff and harassing people really bad and trying to prove a point. And if you had the number 23 to them, it represented something that basically triggered them. They took it as a sign that you were an enemy. And he said, what number house are you? And I told him the number of our house in the dream, which I don't remember now. And he said, okay, well, at least you're not 46. He said, you have a chance that they'll just leave you alone. He said, but if you're 23 or you're 46, they're probably going to come after you. In the dream, I knew immediately that this had something to do with the chromosomes, that the people who were protesting, the people who were all wound up about whatever Trump just signed into effect, it had something to do with people who were pure-blooded. They hadn't taken any kind of treatment. Their blood was pure. So whether you intended to have the number 23 on your house or whatever, or 46, they took it as a sign. They took it as a threat, and they wanted They wanted to just do damage and destruction anyway. So that guy drove off, and I went inside my house, and I was just about to lock the door and turn off the lights, and all of a sudden I noticed a police car drive by, and the police car stopped in front of my house. Before I could do anything, 3 policemen ran inside my house and opened the door and got me down and started yelling at me. 2 of them started yelling at me. One of them was being way less aggressive. And the 2 that were yelling at me were asking me what I was doing and why I was up in the middle of the night and why my light was on. And I put my hands up in the air and I said, I'm not doing anything, I'm going to bed. And I said, some security guard person warned me that there was protests in town. And they had gotten out of control. And so I was just turning off my lights and going to bed. And I was trying to make it clear to the cops that I had nothing to do with the protests, either, for the protests or against the protests or anything. I said, I'm not interested in any of this. I don't even vote. I don't care about any of this. I'm just trying to live a peaceful life with my family. I'm trying to make sure my family's okay. And then the cops threw something. It was like some kind of like small grenade thing with BBs in it, and the BBs started flying all over my entryway, and they broke a couple of my windows, and I was getting hit with these BBs, and it was like meant to stun you. It was like a riot gear type thing. So once all these BBs started flying around in my entryway and breaking my windows, I crouched down on the ground and my hands were still up in the air. And I said, I'm not doing anything. I'm just trying to go to bed. I'm just about to turn off my lights. I'm going to bed. I'm locking my door. I'm going to bed. I'm not part of the protests. And then the one police officer that wasn't screaming, it was a female, and she got closer to me like she was gonna, defend me. And I noticed that one of the cops that was yelling at me pulled out this big syringe, and the other cop zip-tied my hands, and they were trying to restrain me. And the other police officer was gonna hit me with whatever was in this big syringe. And I said as clearly as I possibly could and as calmly as I possibly could, I do not want that. I don't consent to that. I'm not interested in receiving that. And it was like they were going to do it anyway. And then the third police officer started yelling at him and saying, he's not doing anything. He's going to bed. He's turning off his light. He doesn't want that. And right then I noticed that all the rioters and all the protesters had started breaking windows and looting houses right around me, and I knew that my neighbors were getting hit. I knew the houses all around me were getting all torn up. And it was like the police were almost the forerunners of that, to make sure that people were going to get caught off guard. They didn't want anybody to be prepared, and they didn't want anybody to retaliate or defend themselves or anything. And the 2 police officers thought that I was ready to retaliate or defend myself because my light was on in my house. And I was up when I was really just about to lock everything down and go be with my family. And the two police officers that were yelling at me, and they were going to try to jab me with this treatment. They were stopped by the one police officer that started yelling at him and telling him I wasn't doing anything wrong and I had the right to say no, and that I was showing no signs of aggression and that I wasn't doing anything violent, and to let me just go to bed and let me turn off my light and just go to bed because I wasn't doing anything wrong. So finally the police left, and when they left, everything kind of faded. It was like all the rioters and all the stuff came right after them, and they all kind of left at the same time too. And once everything was quiet again, I walked outside of my house and I started looking around, and I noticed that all the houses around me had been just ransacked. They all looked worse than mine. All the windows were busted out, and I went back over, or I was about to go back over to my neighbor's house, but I saw that my wife had come out of the bedroom, and she asked me what was going on, and I was happy that she was smart enough to just stay in the bedroom with our children, and that she didn't come out when the police were there, because I knew that if she was to come out and say anything or yell or anything, that the police would take it as a sign of aggression, and she was smart enough to just stay in the bedroom with the children. So when they left and she came out of the bedroom, I told her quickly what had happened, and then she said that she was just gonna go watch the kids, and I said I would be in a minute, and I went outside to just check around the property, make sure everything was okay. And then I just was going to walk over to the neighbor's house. I started walking to the neighbor's house because I told him that I would check on him. And I was walking over to their house, and I was thinking that, there might be a few of these protesters left. And I wasn't sure if anybody would be in his house that wasn't supposed to be. So I started looking around on the ground, and I found what kind of looked like a fire poker stick for a wood stove. It was just this long, sharp metal rod, and I picked it up, and I was going into his house to make sure everything was okay. And that's when I woke up. And when I woke up, just like in the dream, my wife wasn't in bed. She was downstairs because she still couldn't sleep. And it was like I knew immediately when I woke up that she wasn't going to be in bed. And sure enough, when I woke up, she wasn't in bed, because that's the way the dream had started. And I was only asleep for a few minutes. It had to have been 15, 20 minutes max, because her and I had been up all night and we couldn't sleep, and that's the same way the dream started. And that was tonight. That wasn't long ago. I figured I would record this dream as soon as possible. I'm thinking of the trees with the lights on them, or the one tree with the one light on it, like something had get lit up on the tree. I don't know if that has something to do with, trees and branches and DNA and the 23 and the 46, and then the foxes in the field, and I knew that there was fires in town, and the story of Samson and the foxes in the field, and just the way the dream started and the way the dream ended. I thought it would be a good idea to post a video about it as soon as possible. Just letting people know.